Hello, and welcome to the Outcast Intellectual Podcast. So the thing about commitment is people are usually praising it, right? Say, "Oh, keep your commitments, do this, do that." But the thing is that they also expect you to stop keeping the commitment to X thing when Y situation occurs. So, for example, people say stay committed in a relationship, but if the other person does something horrible, then obviously they don't still expect you to commit to it, right? And so, what do you have in a situation like that? Is where does the commitment begin and end versus the outside factors? And the big thing that occurred to me for this, actually comes from a show, which is what inspired the necklace that I wear. And the character that is sourced from it, you don't need to have watched the show or anything, I'll explain it, is named Griffith. And the show takes place during a warring states era. And the kid is born into like the back alleys. And he has no friends, nothing, just him. But from that alley, he sees a giant castle, like the castle for the entire kingdom up on a hill. And it's this white castle, like it looks like a dream in the distance. And while he's running around one day, he runs into, I think that she's described as like a fortune teller or something like that. And she gives him this, the necklace that I just showed you. I'll show you again since it's not like you're going to necessarily remember it. And it's called the Egg of the King, or the Baylet. And she tells him that it will give him, and this isn't verbatim for people who actually have read it, it's going to give him like his own kingdom, like command over pretty much everything in exchange for his flesh and blood. And being a kid who he's a nobody, he's like an orphan in the alleyways, he doesn't mean anything to him. So he takes the necklace and he starts doing all this stuff. And what Griffith ultimately does is start his own mercenary band. And he calls it the Band of the Hawk. And she plans to use it to help the kingdom he's in win the war against the other kingdom and gain fame and glory that way, and then gradually, earn his way up to the top. And so that's what's happening by the time the series begins. And what you realize while you're watching the show or reading the thing is that he is willing to go to any extent to make that happen. And that includes, like you find out at some point that when the mercenary band was early on, okay, it is actually playing. It was frozen. When the band was early on, there was like a powerful lord who basically offered to pay for like their weapons and everything like that in exchange for a night with Griffith. And we're not talking about a lady, we're talking about a lord, which, like, I know it's 2022, people don't really care about that, but it was, a really big deal when the manga mentioned it. And he agrees to it. And like, the lord was like this tiny, fat, bald dude with a beard. Like, even if you had to pick somebody of the sex that you're not attracted to be with, it would not be this person or their equivalent. But he does it because it moves him closer to his dream. And in that case, people could think it's like, wow, that's okay. But moving past that, he continues winning battle after battle after battle after battle. And he decides to take this, who ends up being the protagonist of the story, who's named Guts, for a reason you probably don't want to hear about. It's related to how he was born. And adds him to the band. And so they're winning. And it seems like Guts is the only person Griffith really sees as a friend as time goes on. I'm simplifying this because you probably don't care about the details, but I need to convey them. And they finally, like, they take like this giant castle. Griffith is like swooning, the princess of the actual king, and so on. They're getting really close to their goal. At one point, somebody tries to have Griffith assassinated, and Griffith is able to tell who it was and sends Guts to assassinate them instead. And when he goes and does that, he does succeed. Spoilers, by the way, but most people are never going to watch Berserk, so whatever. And the thing is that after he succeeds in killing that lord, the lord's son walks in and sees him without the mask. And before he knows that it's the lord's son, he just runs and stabs a person. But like the son is like 8 years old. So he has to fight his way like through the tower and like jump into a moat or whatever, like after doing that accidentally. And then he finally finds his way back to Griffith and hears him saying that for someone to truly be his friend, they have to exist apart from him. They can't just be below him, because then they're just one of his followers. And basically what Guts realizes is that, like, so long as he's working under Griffith will never supposedly see him as a friend. That's like a big like debate point among fans. And so ultimately he decides to leave. When Griffith discovers this, he tries to fight him to keep him from leaving. And Guts manages to win. And when that happens, Griffith basically loses it. He goes and sleeps with the king's daughter, the princess, and he gets found out and he's captured and tortured for a whole year. And the details of that are dark and not probably of the interest of everybody who would be watching. But he gets messed up, like irrefutably and irrecoverably, if that's even a word, and which is very important, because later on they go and rescue him, and then they discover that this person, and Guts comes back because he didn't know that all that stuff happened. He can't talk anymore. He can't the tendons in his hands and feet are cut. Okay, so it's messed up. So you go from the situation where he has all this power, he has all this strength, all this beauty, admiration, and such, and now the band that he got so high up, they're outlaws. He obviously has no rank. He can't talk. He can't do most of anything. And it's then when he's desperate and actually tries to kill himself that he finds this in the water again, which he had lost while he was being tortured. But it finds its way back to him. And as his like the mercenary band are like trying to catch up with him because he'd escaped in a wagon, you start seeing all these demons show up, and basically they get transported to, it's funny because like this just sounds like a medieval thing right now, but then this is like what leads into what is the current story of the show, manga, whatever. And basically all these demons show up and they're just watching the people. And then these 4 more powerful demons show up who are called the God Hand, and basically they direct the flow of history via causality. So they basically make it so that something was going to happen. Like Griffith getting the necklace, all of his battles, his fall from grace, and where he is now. And they give him a choice. He can either continue living as he is now, which is alive, broken, ruined, like just everything that he has ever wanted is just going to eternally be out of his grasp. Or he can sacrifice everybody there in exchange for the power to have the dream that he always wanted. And he chooses ultimately to sacrifice them and gets reborn with the powers that he has during the show. And Guts is excuse me, one of two people that survive this thing, and like hundreds of people were there. So that's the setup. So when it comes to the whole commitment thing, Griffith was definitely committed because he sacrificed all these people who fought so hard with him to get as far as they were. But did he do something wrong by doing that? And that's the deeper notion of what I want to handle. Because the thing is that when people talk about things like right and wrong, they act like there is this this overarching universal morality that you just are stuck having to abide by. But the thing is that whenever there isn't a person to bring a given consequence against you, it doesn't seem like that's true. It seems like you can do whatever you want, and so long as you have the ability to do it, other people just have to deal with it. I think it was a Roman, I don't know if it was like a Roman expression or whatever, or there's like a tale of it where someone who'd been captured by like a Roman general or whatever said, well, what are we supposed to do? Or you can't do this or whatever. And the Roman conqueror said, the strong will do what they have the power to do, and the weak will accept what they must accept. And once you get to the level where you can just tell people, I don't care, and you can just reject their attempts to force consequences on you, it kind of reveals itself to be true. And if you had this situation where we aren't all bound by some like universal line of morality, where you ultimately decide, like, this is the value to me, this is what's important to me, these are my priorities, these are my values, principles, etc. In that situation, the only moral value is ultimately to abide by your own principles, if you think about it. And it's only when you fail to do that, when you're a hypocrite, that you've really done something in quotes wrong. So from this perspective, looking at that situation with Griffith and what he did with sacrificing all these people that fought so hard with him, but in the name of the thing that he would otherwise have to give up, what's the black and white nature of that? You know what I mean? Is there one? While he's being convinced by those God hand demon people I was talking about, he has a vision where he's on top of a mound of corpses trying to reach the castle. And what he tells himself is, if he stops now, all those people he sacrificed, including the lives of his followers, comrades and such, they all go to waste. And so from that perspective, if he had given up, he would have been, in a way, sacrificing more people than who he ultimately sacrifices, because he would have made everything he'd done up to that point just pointless. Because, so with that in mind, I would say think about something that's really important to you, and also consider how far you would go to abide by it. If you have a family or a spouse or whatever, like, how much would you value their life over somebody else's? If you had two buttons and one killed the person that you care about and the other one killed somebody else, and someone had a gun to your head and said you have to pick one, how high would the number on is this the left? I don't know if it's like mirroring me. How high would this number of people have to be that you would do that? And is the reality of that trading ratio or whatever kind of expose that all the things that we talk about, like love and commitment and all this stuff, does that just expose that it's only as true as the other side allows it to be? Because if this person is so important to you and you would never sacrifice them, what about when this number of people that you have to sacrifice instead is 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000, or 1,000,000,000 people who you will never meet or have never known, worth more than this person? So to be a little bit less extreme with that, say that you're an entrepreneur doing whatever you do, or even just you want to get a better position at the company you work at, whatever it is. Your goal in this case is to rise up the ranks or to get more clients or to, whatever. So to what extent are you willing to sacrifice other aspects of your life to make that happen? To what degree are you committed to that idea? In the field that I'm in, copywriting, in case you're watching this and you're not a copywriter, there are a lot of people who they can do something, but it's uncomfortable. But instead, they say that it's impossible. For example, I just came back from Florida from, what was that, last weekend? 2 weekends ago? I don't know, time's a mystery to me. And there's another workshop for a particular kind of copy happening in Florida again at the beginning of April. Is it going to be comfortable for me to have to shell out the money to go back there or to pay for the hotel rooms or whatever? No. But the opportunity, because I'm committed to making that a success, is more important than the cost. Whereas a lot of other people are saying, well, I want to, that would be really nice. Granted, we all have our own positions and lives that we're living. But that's my point, is that ultimately people act like they're these leaves on the wind and they're just stuck doing this or that. But when you think about it, your priorities are always in effect. It's just a matter of being aware of them so that you can decide what's the most important to you. And so bringing that back to the Griffith example, if something is more important to you than anything else, and you've sacrificed your own body, you've sacrificed other people's lives, you've assassinated people, you've done all this stuff in order to make that a reality, at what point, if you give up on that, are you just not just being a hypocrite, but you've just wasted everybody's life that was given in order to do that? And how do you weigh that against the people you're sacrificing now? If it's your job, how many hours are you willing to work? How many days are you willing to work those hours and not spend time with this family member or those friends or going on this vacation or doing that? To what degree are you committed to this dream of yours, idea? And how aware are you of that reality? Because usually when people are getting miserable about stuff like that, when they're just so worked up about the fact that they cannot get ahead with their job or their relationship is failing or anything else, their health, physical fitness. Sorry, trying not to sneeze. At what point do you just need to accept that it's not a priority to you and just understand that just because you're saying that it's important or that you should want to do it doesn't mean that you really want to. And it's honestly better to just not pretend and just be honest about it. And I think that comes back to the amorality of commitment. I should have said the amorality rather than the morality of it, because people talk about certain things with reverence when it's in the bounds of social expectation. But you think about, I don't know, people like Hitler, Alexander the Great and such. they obviously had a commitment to what they wanted, but we consider it a very dark commitment to make. But if the notion of keeping your commitments applies to everything, then, you know what I mean? People like to cherry pick stuff. So they love saying keep your commitments when it happens to involve like going to a soup kitchen and giving food to, the homeless, the poor and such. But when your idea of keeping your commitment is to freaking take over the world, well, it's like, well, now you're just a lunatic. So it's like, when does that change? And that's kind of more of an aspect of logic than it is of morality, I guess, because it says if this, then that. So if keep your commitment, then keep your commitment no matter what. So that's the first thing that occurs to me. Still getting used to the flow of doing these on my own. Chris will probably be back on Thursday, but I can only do a half-hour session then. Okay. So another aspect of this example, the guy that I mentioned, Guts, who Griffith got so upset with when he left. If the value of keeping your commitment is relative to your personal priorities and values invested in that commitment, then correspondingly, what Griffith did wrong was to let his feelings for another person distract him from that, if you think about it. But that seems contrary to it, because you could say that for someone who is like megalomaniacal and how like obsessed they were with their dream, they're willing to do whatever it took to whoever it took, or whoever they had to do it to make that happen. On the other hand, you just have like this very human connection where it's just this brother in arms, this friend that he just couldn't stand losing. To a normal person, that second example would just be fine. It would be okay, right? Like, this is how you should be. This is how normal people are. Except that wasn't what he was trying to do with his life. So in this case, that thing that people would support and value more would be the problem. That would be the issue. And so when you run into a situation where you want something so badly and you have other things in your life that other people would say, like, you should be more important, family, friends, community, whatever. Is that really the case? Or is that just them trying to project their stuff onto you? I've experienced it a lot myself because I just want what I want. And for example, whenever I'm doing X kind of work or whatever, I talk to like another potential client saying, oh, you're doing all this, like, what time are you going to have for my stuff? Like, dude, you don't understand. I don't go on dates. I don't go on vacations just for their own sake, except for when I go to Europe. But that's like like the only time I've ever done anything like that. I haven't even done it yet. I am committed to making this stuff happen, even if it means staying up, even if it means working on the weekend. And I don't care about doing that. So many people are talking about working less or retiring and such. I don't care. I just want to do more of what I want to do. That's all that matters to me. And so for me, the balance of work doesn't really exist because I want what the work brings. So if I have my current client now and I'm managing all the lists and such and writing this and tracking that and all this stuff, that doesn't mean I don't have time for somebody else simply because I will make time when other people will not. But then when you run into the situation where you're being perceived by others, which happens on a daily basis because we live surrounded by people, there is the truth of it versus what the other people are going to perceive. And that's kind of like a whole different topic, what you are versus like what you're seen as and like how that interacts. So I won't touch that too much. But the big case in point here being, if you sit down and you just really figure out what your priorities are, what really matters to you. Like the 4 things that you like could not stand to not have in your life or not be true like in 5 months or whatever. What are you willing to sacrifice to make that happen? And can you have all 4 of those things? And it's an arbitrary number, but can you have all those things at the same time? Or do you need to sacrifice one to have the others? Or do you need to sacrifice something else you might take for granted in order to make all those happen? Again, it comes back to the whole nature of people talk about commitment, but it's only when it comes easy or when it's not bothering somebody else or whatever that people think that you should do it. I have work to do for my clients, which I will get done. I'm still doing this podcast. Why? Because I committed to it. Because whether someone is watching it now, which Facebook is telling me is not happening, but that's okay. Or whether this is a release on YouTube and you're watching it in 3 years or whatever, it doesn't matter because I said I was going to do it today at 10 a.m., which is still my 10 a.m. I don't know if the time zone thing fucked it up. The point being is that keeping in mind that keeping a commitment will necessarily mean that you will have to sacrifice other things brings you to the matter from an entirely different mindset than wanting to have your cake and eat it too. Because I'm committed to doing the podcast. That also doesn't mean that I think other people just need to accept that I've committed to it. So for example, if, a few months down the line, I'm still doing this and someone's upset with us, like, well, you were doing this, but what about our stuff? It's like, I will do both. That's the whole thing, is that me doing the podcast does not exist in a vacuum. It exists relative to other people who can perceive what I'm doing as well. It doesn't mean, well, I'm doing this, so deal with it, because I'm also committed to these other things. So for me, what that means is having to accept the responsibility that someone will see the podcast and not be happy that I'm doing this relative to rather than that. And I will then have to deal with that situation as part of the cost of doing the podcast consistently. It's okay because I'm committed to it. But most people's commitment ends when inconvenience begins. And I think just being a little bit more honest with ourselves is probably just one of the easiest things we can do when it comes to making something happen. A good example is, I don't think anybody's watching at the moment. Oh, one is. Okay. The only person who's willing to put up with my nonsense for a long enough period of time. So pal, Chrislyn, wants to go to that workshop I mentioned earlier next month. And she booked the Airbnb, she booked the hotels and such. Airbnb and hotels. She just wanted to have fallbacks. No, she got the Airbnb and the flights. Oh, hey, Whitney. Hopefully I don't think this is like delayed too much. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So Crystal was planning on doing that. And then she realized that her friend and her had already planned to go to this concert because people don't like conflict. Becca's here too. I wonder if this is like part of just the time zone thing, because I forgot that. Never mind, I'm getting distracted. I wonder if that's part of the reason why there's like offset stuff. So anyway, basically, Kristen's choice seemed to be between keeping her commitment to going to the concert with her friend, tickets bought and everything, or going to the workshop. And she decided to go to the concert because she'd already committed to that. Until she was on a co-working call with, I think it was Andrew Tennant, Robert Siegelquist, sorry if I say your name wrong. He's not watching, it doesn't matter. Siegelquist, and myself. And we basically said, well, I mean, I think it's on Tuesday, the concert's on Tuesday, and the other stuff is like Wednesday, Thursday, whatever. It's like, so it's not that she couldn't do it. It's just that it's a pain in the ass to do it. And that's the thing, is that people, Lana said, people don't like conflict. I think it's people don't like hardship, because there's no conflict. I mean, it depends on what you call conflict, but there's no conflict between if you do this and you do that in terms of people's expectations. Maybe they would want you to come back or whatever, but that's not the issue. It's not like she decided to do one instead of the other. It's just a matter of the personal cost of doing both. And so ultimately, as far as I'm aware, Chrysalin decided to do both. But that is part of truly being committed to what you want to do. It's not using excuses other people will allow you to use when you can. It's knowing that this is the actual truth of the situation. That it's not impossible. It's just not impossible, but inconvenient. And just committing to making it happen. Or to admit that it's not as high of a priority to make it happen as you originally thought. So when you think about this thing that you want to do, are you willing to sacrifice for it? You could even say that the value of a commitment is the extent to which you are prepared to sacrifice for it. Because, for example, my autonomy is the most important thing to me. My ability to decide what I'm going to do is the most important aspect to me. It's one reason why I hate the idea of ever having a kid. Never want to do it. Why? Because when you have that kid, your brain chemistry, your body chemistry probably literally changes. Accountability. So if I'm hijacked, which is really what that comes down to, it doesn't mean that everybody needs to feel bad about it, but the point is that what does it come to versus what you value now? Because for me, since my autonomy, my liberty, etc., self-determination is such a big deal, I don't value having a kid. I don't value having these different attachments that will steal my mind away from me in the name of something else. It's probably loud and laughed at me. But yeah, Rebecca gets it, and that's that is why I always argue, though, for existentialism when it comes to values. And existentialism is basically like everybody has their own value. There is no overarching thing that we all have to abide by. Because how do you reconcile that? How would you reconcile someone like people like Rebecca and me who prize our personal decision and ability to control ourselves and decide what we want to be our priorities over someone who just wants to have a kid with their loved one? There's nothing wrong with either way. But if you judge everybody by the same standard, same expectation, then somebody has to be wrong. And that's only two differences. That's not even like all the gigantic differences throughout the world and cultural differences and expectations and all that stuff. So when it comes back to the nature of commitment, what are you prepared to sacrifice in the name of what you want? If I value autonomy more than anything else, that means that if there's a potential romantic partner or whatever, and she wants to have a kid someday, I just have to admit, what about having 4 kids with a loved one? Exactly. That's all about what your priorities are. If having more kids for you brings more joy to your life and brings more significance, then that's what you should do. But if you value your personal autonomy more than everything else, and this is actually true, it's not just something you're telling yourself, then you by extent have to accept that you will have to sacrifice that potential relationship if it hinges on eventually having a child. Because you can't have both. That's the thing, is most of the time people are trying to have their cake and eat it too. And they're so busy juggling this thing and doing that thing and trying to keep out everything in the air that eventually there are too many balls to juggle and they drop one. And what happens when you drop one ball? You drop another one, and another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. And yes, Lana, that is a nightmare for me. I cannot imagine my life in that situation, which just makes people that much more interesting that we all want such different things. But it all brings it back to, if we aren't obligated to live certain kinds of lives, to follow some grand thing that we're all supposed to follow, which I don't believe we do, then it comes down to us to decide what's important. Which, following from that, our priorities decide what's important to us, and to what extent are we willing to sacrifice other things, or even among those things, in the name of what is most important. If you want to make X amount of money per month, but it's stealing time away from, it doesn't have to be your kids, it could be just your family. Again, not something I really know anything about, but if that is something that's more important to you than anything else, then you have to let go of making X amount of money under that situation. Doesn't mean that you can't like change things around or whatever. Maybe you need to raise your rates or find a different job, whatever it is. But understanding that to truly abide by your values and your principles and your commitments, there are things that you necessarily have to sacrifice in the name of that. And so to bring it back to what I started things about, excuse me, when the character Griffith sacrificed all these people who had fought for him, was he in the wrong for doing that? Or was he in the wrong for letting a genuine connection with another person influence him to such a point where he would just bring that dream crashing down? Because again, most people value that personal connection. They would say that that was the one good part of him, that valued another human being above his own desires. But in that case, and this is ultimately why I don't think that us being bound to a morality that exists outside of ourselves makes any sense. Because if value is determined outside of you, then nothing you want really matters. What you think doesn't matter. What you believe doesn't matter. Because there's already this list of things that you need to do, a list of ways you need to act, responses you're allowed to give without being crazy or evil or such. And who writes those lists? Inevitably, whoever is telling you how to live your life. But really, who would be able to write that? And if that's the case, then somebody else had to write that as well. And that goes into who wrote it and everything. So ultimately, it comes back to that situation like when someone says that you're selfish, but the reason they're saying you're selfish is probably because you didn't do something they wanted you to do. And I don't think it's hard to really see how it's more selfish to expect other people to do what you want than it is to just do what you want to do. And in fact, I would say the bad example over here is narcissistic, because you don't even acknowledge that people have autonomy. You're basically a baby trying to say come over here and do what I want. So when you think about that, to some people that's scary because it means there's no rules. We're just living one big wild west and nothing matters. But that is, I think, a big part of it. When you consider the nature of people believing that right and wrong exist outside of ourselves, that whole attitude devalues people, which is ultimately why I think that it's logically insane to believe in that, because it basically says nothing about you has any value, because all the value you have is given to you. The only value you have in existence is what is decided for you, and you're sacrificing of yourself in the name of that. Except you can't sacrifice yourself because you don't mean anything if what you believe and think doesn't matter. You can't subtract 1 from 0 to get less than 0. Okay, you can, if you're talking actual mathematics, but I'm a writer, not a mathematician, so the 0 is the end. Okay, I think you get my point. Community minded, do what you're supposed to. Exactly. They define the value based on someone's role and function in their imagined whole. which is a reality of functioning, but I'm trying not to get too distracted. The only universal truths and values is be true to you and do the best you can and do as little harm as you can while being true to yourself. Well, the funny thing is, though, doing harm, ultimately harm is just a perception of ours, because even if you kill something and end its life, it just dissolves and goes back into the earth and just nourishes something else, unless you put it in a box that keeps it from dissolving into the earth. But don't worry about that. Point being is that even our notions of like what is right on these given levels is still based on our experience as people. Because the universe, like if a comet hit the planet, the universe doesn't care. There is no karmic outcry of, oh no, all the people are gone. Sorry, it's just matter that changes shape, you know? And so when you take it out of that emotional investment there and you understand that everybody creates their own meaning, ultimately in the sense because the meaning isn't really there. Like you basically project your reality. It's like you're painting your world onto a blank canvas or something. See, even I can't help but get, romantic about certain things. I think the intent behind the action is what's important. Stealing is wrong. I'm doing what I have to do to feed my family. Yeah, but ultimately the consequence is still there. You know what I mean? Because what about that other person's family? It's everything you do, again, necessarily has some kind of has some kind of income. There is a certain kind of income. It has a certain output, consequence. So to bring it back, the things that matter to you, how far are you willing to go with them? What are you willing to sacrifice? And the interesting thing about that is, like, you can't even, ultimately you can say that, like, you can list priorities based on like what else you're willing to give up, because ultimately your highest priority is whatever you would sacrifice everything else for, right? But there is no real quantitativeness to it. There's no value to it, because everything has to flow with who you change to be as well. What you value now is probably not what you valued 20 years ago. It doesn't mean that you betrayed the self of you then, because you've evolved since then. But the important part is that it was you who decided to do that. And I guess you could apply that to the whole family thing, because if they value their autonomy and then they have a kid and then they're like this, them, I'm trying not to get too pronoun-y here, of that time would say that this is a betrayal of their priorities. But the person as they exist now, who now values the child, for them, that's still autonomy. So it even like, this is exactly why I don't think that you can have like a universal, like hard and fast truth for anything, because it gets so goddamn complicated. Like it is so vague at certain levels. And then you just have different perspectives saying this, that, and the other thing. It's like, okay, but where's your proof? There is no proof, because it's all just people's perspectives. And yet that perception creates their reality and is what they act out of. Someone's child having more value than another person is just not true. But the person perceives it that way. To them, the child is more important than anything else. Even often the person that they love so much that they chose to live with for their entire life and have the child with. To me, that's fucked up, but that's why I'm me. So I want to make sure that I'm not going around in circles too much. Like I want to do the full, oh man, it's already 10:50. See, my gift for gab is truly strong. So yeah, I guess it is most of everything. It's just a matter of kind of, to summarize everything, because I know that I've gone back and forth a lot and gotten distracted a lot. If to value yourself proportionate to some external thing is illogical and irrational, because those other things would necessarily be created by another entity. You can have whatever beliefs you want, but there still needs to be an entity that created this expectation. And you just can't have your own internal value if every form of value that you have is pursuant to something else giving it to you, or your value to that other thing. So if you bring that down, and what matters most and what you should abide by are what matters most to you, you bring that down. What are those things that matter the most to you? You can set a number for it. You can not set a number for it. I don't care. It's your life, it's your values. If you know what those things are, can you have them to the extent that you want at that level? And in exchange for that, what do you have to sacrifice to have that now, to have it later, to have it within the time span, that you want? And are you prepared to sacrifice those things in the name, like external things, in the name of achieving or having or maintaining or whatever those things that matter most to you, outside of other people's support? Now, that's the most important thing, because people have their priorities and then they get derailed because, like, somewhere along the way, there's all these other factors. So are you prepared to deal with those factors and just say, well, that's the reality of keeping my commitment? Because in that case, you also end up having to kind of accept that you could be the Griffith in that scenario, that you could be the person doing the thing that nobody else will support, and everybody will basically just say you're crazy or evil or whatever. Are you so committed to your goals or priorities or dreams or whatever that you are willing to abide by them even under those circumstances? Most people aren't. They're just not. And that's what it all comes back to. Again, it's the sacrifice. And that is why I think that the way that they handled that character, Griffith's decision to abide by his dream, made it perfect for him. Because when everything you do exists for this one singular purpose, the only wrong thing you can do is betray that purpose. And if other people don't like that, well, they're living in their world and you're living in yours. Same bad time, same bad channel. Remember, I forgot.